Welcome to Tailor Made Chaos. On this podcast, we'll bring you some of the highest flyers and most interesting people in and around the fitness industry. We'll talk and laugh with CEOs, franchisee groups, exercise specialists, and to those who work in sales and marketing, and will share their insights and knowledge of all things related to the business of fitness. Love what you hear? Make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date. On with today's show, proudly brought to you in conjunction with Fit Into Shape, a small but dedicated team of fitness industry professionals, delivering on all of your fitness equipment and gym design needs.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to a special episode of TaylorMade Chaos. Today is the first threesome that I had, and it's not the usual format that I would normally go for then. Now, today I'm going to try and be something that I'm not normally, and that's professional, because I have two very professional industry colleagues here. Gentlemen,
see how long this lasts.
it's probably not going to last very long, as you'll witness from the start of it. But today, in this special episode, I'd like to introduce Mr. Emmett Williams and Mr. Ken Griffin. Griffin, as in like the character from
That's right.
what's that show?
American Dad.
Yeah. Very good. Well, please,
Thanks
Emmett,
for having us, Glenn.
more feathers in your cap than a peacock. I might have used that line before, but only with you. But mate, do you want to give us a quick rundown on who you are and why we are sitting here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me to begin with, Glenn. Emmett Williams, been in the industry for about 22 years, I think it's been. I am one of the owner-operators of Creative Fitness Marketing, a marketing company in the fitness industry, one of the founding partners of MyZone, a wearable technology business in the industry. I'm now over as Managing Director of ABC Fitness for Asia Pacific, and I'm also the chair of AusActive, our peak body that we're here to talk about.
That is the main reason for it, and probably a very good introduction to one of the newest members of the fitness industry, so to speak. So Ken, you want to give us a quick rundown on your background and what we're here to discuss today?
Yeah, so my name's Ken Griffin. I'm the new CEO of AusActive. This is week 6 at the moment. And the reason I'm here is because I've been looking around in health, which has been the business I've been in for the last 20 years, and sort of realising that the maths isn't mathing. And by that I mean I've been working in primary healthcare in particular, representing nurses and being part of the health reform that's been going on in Australia. And it hasn't made a lot of sense to me from the perspective of actually preventing all the chronic disease and a lot of the issues to do with an ageing population. So when we diagnose someone in health, we're essentially accepting that a certain amount of permanent damage has been done to their body.
Yep.
And yep, we can do a whole lot of things that prevent that progressing, but when your average Australian is thinking about prevention, I reckon they prefer not to be damaging their bodies. And so I've been looking at how I move upstream, if you like, to try and stop people getting into the health system. And AusActive is really the natural place for me to be, to have as much impact and to continue the great work that AusActive started, which is to prevent Australians from becoming unhealthy in the first place and do it through exercise, which is such a powerful intervention.
Yeah, well, I often talk about with exercise that it's prehabilitation prior to a surgery or a surgical intervention, and I think you probably hit the nail on the head with that one. So just going back for those who have short memories, but Emmett, the peak body used to be called Fitness Australia, and obviously we had some changes over the COVID period. Do you want to just recap a bit of that period and talk to us why it's now AusActive and the direction that we're now headed?
Yeah, and if we go way back, it was a federated system, right? It was the states, it was Fitness Victoria, Fitness New South Wales, Fitness Queensland.
You're getting rid of some cobwebs.
Yeah, that is a while ago. That feels like 15 to 20 years ago when you and I were both younger men. That converged into the national body of Fitness Australia. But it was January of 2022 that Barry Elvish, the CEO at the time, and Jane Blake, the chair, guided the organisation through a rebrand to AusActive. And the purpose of that rebrand, they were a few years out of COVID at that point, or maybe getting to the tail end of it. And there were two objectives. One was to broaden the tent and invite other modalities into our space. You know, the word fitness was very specific to a meaning that really represented a gym, and also from a advocacy perspective represented sports people getting fit for an event or what have you. And so the idea of tapping into Oz Active was to broaden out and to talk about physical activity, including yoga, including Pilates and these types of other modalities. But then when it came down to advocacy, we could go and forge a seat at the table, so to speak, and talk about the benefits of physical activity from a broader sense. And so it was a rebranding to achieve the objective of growing the industry long term.
Yeah. And look, I think there's been some great success with that rebrand. Often, I'm very skeptical about a rebrand, just being a change in name, but I really feel like, over the last 4 to 5 years that, Barry and Jane took some really massive steps in getting us, redirected into, activity or generally greater health. And
that's the bigger game.
Your recent appointment, I think, is probably evidence of that. So, Ken, do you want to talk, again, you touched on where your background was, but, why put your hand up and change industries? Why go from health to
Well, I reckon you've just hit the nail on the head. So I've been getting lots of calls from my ex-colleagues in health asking me what it's like to be out of health. It's a pretty tough gig at the moment. And my question back to them is, why do you think I've stepped out of health? Exercise is the most natural way of actually, making yourself feel better and actually preventing yourself from being unhealthy later on. And when you think about it, the health minister has traditionally also been the sports minister. So if you want to think about sports as your proxy for exercise and activity as we think it should be, for some reason the health minister, despite wearing the same hat as the health minister, being the same person, those two things have never come together in the consciousness of the person who's going to be making decisions about how many hospitals they have to fund and how many GPs they have to pay and how many healthcare professionals they have to educate. And really what I'd like to see happen is, in that idea of true prevention, where someone doesn't have to be damaged before they're diagnosed and then gets help from the health system, I'd really like to see them actually be chasing up river to actually getting people moving. We've got 47% of the country have one or more chronic diseases. When we think chronic diseases, we're thinking type 2 diabetes, completely reversible. Heart disease, completely avoidable, often reversible. Cholesterol, completely reversible, often avoidable. These are just some of the things that are really tricky issues because our health system was never designed to actually deal with this. Our health system was designed 60, 70 years ago, Medicare 40 years ago. These were designed for people coming into hospitals, having been in a car accident or, having their foot run over by a tractor. It wasn't about taking people with advanced mental illness and triaging them through an A&E. It wasn't about getting someone whose type 2 diabetes has got completely away from them. It wasn't about having people who are overweight because of thyroid conditions and actually having that, sort of dealt with in a hospital setting. And so all of that stuff's pushing down into our GPs. They've got less time and actually they've got huge workforce shortages. So all of this, that as I see it, is actually about going to the natural next extent. Because we didn't always have doctors. Remember, the health system, hospitals were designed before we had the idea of doctors being available for everyone. We've actually got to go to, almost Medicare 3.0 and go, right, what do we do before someone even gets to a doctor? Because those chronic diseases, they're nothing that a doctor is going to do anything about or has the capability to do anything about in the context of Medicare, unless someone's taking responsibility and has the knowledge and the tools and the guidance of an exercise professional to really make good choices that set them up for a really healthy life. And so that's what I'm really passionate about. We are 35,000 or thereabouts exercise professionals in Australia. We don't have a workforce shortage. We'd like more people in the sector, but we don't have a shortage at the moment, and we've got a lot of latent capacity. So our pitch to government essentially would be, hey, if you include us, unlike all the other health professions who are turning out their pockets saying, we're smashed, we can't possibly do anything, we've actually got the ultimate sale, which is, hey, we can come and bring exercise to the party. We can do it in a really knowledgeable, clear scope of practice kind of a way. and we can do it really well. And we've got capacity in our sector to actually work as an adjunct to the health system, which will ultimately take a lot of pressure off it and actually help out those doctors and the nurses and the allied health professionals, stop some of that ramping at hospitals over time, because we actually stop people entering the system in the first place.
Glenn, I should jump in just quickly.
Please.
Ken was one of 200 candidates, and this is the final selection. So just for credit where it's absolutely due, and I think that is a tip of the cap to the prior administration. I mean, Barry Olvish came on as a CEO for just 6 months, right? Jane and the board had selected this interim CEO just to buy some time. Barry ended up staying more than 6 years, took the organisation through COVID. But in recent years, we ended up getting into Parliament House, right? And we didn't do it through the front door. We kind of did it through the entrepreneurial back door. We hustled our way into the castle and we forged relationships, we built credibility, we got the repetition in there and the familiarity and whatever it may be, so as to set ourselves up to put an ask in. And that ask is a budget submission, and it includes things that we can talk about in a moment. But when the AusActive board addressed the CEO succession challenge ahead of it, and we went to market and screened for candidates, the fact that we got 200 qualified potential candidates put their hand up and say, yes, I want to go for this job, is an absolute credit to where Fitness Australia evolving into AusActive has been. But one thing that the board prioritised was that we, going forward, that we would stand on the shoulders of the giants before us. We weren't to waste the opportunity that we've created, particularly in the last 36 months. And so when we looked at all the candidates, and a lot of people have been asking me, why did the board select Ken as the CEO? And the thing about Ken is that he's got this broad experience, right? He and his wife have a small business in the allied health space, which means that Ken can empathise with small business operators that make up the majority of this industry. He's worked in big business with Lynn Fox and the like, so we can understand big business, which is also part of this industry. He's run an association before, which is really important because associations run differently to the way commercial enterprises run. But he's also had experience, of course, as you've been listening to, at Parliament and also at state politics level. And that ability to, or those expertise of being able to take this momentum and advocate forward was something that we wanted to prioritise. And one thing that we did in the lead up to the final 3 candidates, that is, we went out and we asked for 12 references. And I've never done this before. This was an idea from a friend of mine. They said, look, before you select your CEO, get the references before the final 3, not after you've selected, just to mitigate any risk.
Yep.
And don't get 3 references, get 12. I said, why would we do that? Because you'll get a broad understanding of references that include not only people down the org chart, people up the org chart, people outside the organisation and so forth. And I still remember reading Ken's 12 references as we went through the process. A process that took 12 months. It was a big job. And one of those references was the head of the RACGP, Michael Wright, who we'd been working really hard to get the attention of. And we'd only just got the attention of Michael Wright. And the RACGP is essentially the peak body for GPs, right? So to get the attention of that person was one thing, but to see Michael Wright on Ken's reference list was another. But also there was an assistant minister in Jed Kearney, who was on the list, and that was a minister that we were trying to interact with as well from an advocacy point of view. So Ken really did tick a lot of the boxes, and it was important that we went with Ken so that we could take this peak body to the next level. And yes, on one side of the equation, we want to save the world against physical inactivity. And that's an honourable thing to do, right? We all agree around the science of physical activity, whether that be for the individual, whether it be for a family, whether it be for an employment group, or whether it be for the nation with healthcare costs. But equally, over on the commercial side of the equation, we want to grow the industry. And we know that the federal government, look, the biggest line item, and Ken, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the biggest line item on the federal budget is social security. Second to that is health, and health is the sum of education and defence. it's a huge line item on the budget. And if we can tap into that to help us promote physical activity, if we can influence legislation around tax and the like, then we can eliminate the drag effect from the general population. We can boost the thrust effect. And it may be that we can go out to the 27 million Australians and encourage just a few more to consider physical activity, and just a few more to convert from being a lead into a member, and just a few more to not quit this month, but to give it another 2 or 3 months in order to build a routine. And if we can do that, then from a commercial perspective, every one of our members will benefit economically.
Look, one of the things I'm really passionate about is that link between medical and fitness. And if I even go back in my own personal history, I was a physical training instructor in the Army. Very different physical physique then to what I am now, but the mind still remembers. And the point I'm trying to make there is, back when I was in the military, the physios used to have one of the physical training instructors work in the hospital to work with rehabilitation. And I actually thought that was something that obviously made a lot of sense. At the time I went, why don't physios prescribe exercise? But the reality is they don't really know how, because they're not exercise prescribers. They know movement, but they don't know how to prescribe exercise that well. And not to insult any physios, but that's typically, where that's not their skill set.
Yep.
Prescribing exercise is what people who are doing Cert 3, Cert 4 and have experience with. What I came to notice when I transitioned from the military into the commercial fitness industry is medical referrals just isn't there. So I really love that link. And Ken, I suppose, I think without preempting it, I would assume one of your mandates is to try and close that gap between health and fitness so that people really do believe that they're aligned.
Yeah, there's, to pick up on both your points, the national health budget is $187 billion. That's billion with a B, every year. So to put that in context, if you're outraged about nuclear submarines, they're going to cost 2 years of the health system. So if we can save 10% of the health system budget by getting people healthier, given that currently chronic disease costs the health system about 28% of its entire health budget. If we can even save 5 or 10% of that a year, guess what? We can have all the nuclear submarines we want if we decide that's what we want to build, right? And that's not going to be the pitch, but I mean, it should give you a sense of the scale.
It's a different way to go.
That's right. So I mean, when you think about it, it's that idea that something that helps people change the course of their health and their life by 2 degrees or 2%. And, I remember a motivational speaker saying, oh, look, the difference between taking it from Sydney and changing your course by 2 degrees means you end up in London as opposed to Brazil, but that's what you could be doing for people's health, right? Now, I probably prefer to Brazil, like the climate agrees to me, but maybe we should go from London to Brazil.
But I've got the arse.
Yeah, that's right. But the good thing there is that we can actually have a big impact. And that idea of, hey, we can help Australia's health and have a meaningful and dramatic impact on that is really real. But importantly, from the business perspective, if we think about where we can outpace the health system, the first one is cost. Like, our system is actually largely privatised, except for the community-based centres that we have, but the majority of it is private enterprise, actually doing really good jobs to run lean businesses that are actually really, really good experiences because it's driven by the market in a really competitive marketplace, right? I really respect this sector for what it brings to the to the business perspective. The second one is that actually a lot of our best work is done in a group space. Now, that's a really big thing that you might not think about, because whenever you've seen a doctor or a nurse or an allied health professional, guess what? It's always one-on-one. And there's reasons for that, but it actually slows down how many people you can see and how many people you can help. And so the idea of us doing things in group-based approaches to actually reduce chronic disease is actually really, really effective. Or actually, guess what? They can be self-paced in a purpose-designed program in a gym setting that they run themselves. No healthcare professional needed, just a safe space that they feel comfortable changing their health in. We're set up for that. And so we can actually, as a 35,000 people, as opposed to a 640,000 people health system, because that's how many health professionals there are, we can actually get through more, in their words, patients, in our words, clients or customers, we can actually get through more in a day than they can. So we've got economies of scale and efficiencies, and we've already got the infrastructure. So no one's going to have to build an expensive hospital. No one's going to have to, sort of wait in line as much because we can see people more. And it's going to be really cost effective as an intervention. But importantly, from a business perspective, not only does it mean we don't actually have to do anything new. Anything new that the health system does requires huge retraining of 640,000 people. It requires big infrastructure. It means big hospitals with big expensive machines. We've already got the infrastructure. And importantly, with a lot of the people that we need to see, they're already outside the workforce. They're already retired in the case of people, 1 in 5 people in Australia will be over the age of 65 by 2030. So that's only 4 years away. These are people who we need to keep healthy, who are healthy at the moment, but if they don't really get proactive on that, if the country doesn't get proactive on that, they're going to decline pretty quickly over the next 15 years of their lives. We're already in place. We can do this. And because we've got people who we need to sort out who are health-wise, who are outside the workforce quite often, or actually because of retirement or because of chronic disease, guess what? These are people that we can be using the latent capacity in our system. All those times where your sites are empty or not used to capacity, this is where we can put them so that we're actually making our businesses more efficient and more profitable. And we're actually getting these people the experience they need in a gym so that they can be in some of those more peak times over time. But we've got the spaces, we've got the expertise. The government just needs to have a look around because we're in their blind spot right now. They need a bit of a head check to realise who's really coming up to help them.
Yeah. So one of the things that you highlighted before, when you talked about the back door, and I did my very best to stay professional, and I'll continue to do so. One of the ways in which you kind of had this great breakthrough, and one of the things that I think is the missing link, which Ken will touch on later, is the Fit for Office project. So can you talk a bit of back history on that? How did that come about?
Yeah.
The Sunshine Coast and then the Parliament House one, if you can do a bit of background on that.
Yeah, so we're at Beyond Active.
He's going to talk for 10 minutes.
No, I'll get this in a minute, Glenn.
You saw it first. Emmett Williams is limited to 1 minute.
So Fit for Office and Million Moves are two different things, so that would be 2 1-minute explanations.
Okay.
Only joking.
I'll give you two.
No, so here we are at Beyond Active in Melbourne, right, recording. It was Beyond Active Singapore 3 years ago. Barry came up to me and said, and he's a little bit of a Mad Men, what am I thinking, Don Draper in terms of his headlines and slogans. And he came up and he said, Emmett, can I have a word? I said, sure. And he said, how about we go to Parliament House and we take MyZone, the wearable technology platform, and we run a competition with the legislators and we call it Fit for Office, a play on words. Brilliant, let's do it. We had a few contacts already. We ended up setting up one meeting. One meeting turned into about 35 meetings. And it was all because we weren't there with our hand out asking for money or with a budget submission demanding a change in legislation. We were there to have fun. It was like a corporate walking challenge or something similar. And because we did that for 2 years, 3 years in a row, we built that trust and we built that familiarity, like I said before, and that put us in a position to build relationships and help support the budget submissions going forward. Now, it was one of the politicians, it was Andrew Wallace from the Sunshine Coast, who wasn't in Canberra at the time, but his chief of staff saw the idea and thought, my gosh, Andrew Wallace would love to do this. But he was in New York representing the Australian Parliament at the United Nations at the time. And he went back on email to his chief of staff and said, how can you get me involved in this? I'm not going to be back for another 10 days. Now, I had an office in America through MyZone at the time, and I just overnighted a device to his apartment. He got it the next day. He couldn't believe it. He started. He fell in love with it. He came back to Australia and said, how is it that we can take this to the general population? And that's where we generated Million Moves, which is a very different campaign to Fit for Office, but it was essentially what we were trying to achieve. Andrew enjoyed that general population physical activity promotion campaign so much that he went to the floor of the lower house and demanded that we bring back a Life Be In It And if you're above the age of 37 and you grew up in Australia, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not,
I'm like
then
a modern day Norm myself, actually. But
yeah, that's right. And if you're not, then think Slip Slop Slap, right? It was a campaign that was super successful, promoting the benefits of physical activity and some other things as well, but primarily physical activity. And his question to Parliament was, what could we achieve if we brought a campaign like this back to Australia? And that's what we've been pushing at, whether it's Life Be In It, whether it's a Slip Slop Slap lookalike, whether it's our own homegrown program like Million Moves. And let me bring this all the way back to that small business operator, because I think
The thing is, as a peak body,
we look at some international scoops here.
well, I think the first thing is, as a peak body, our job is to make sure that we're actually creating the environment in which the health, the health bit, but also the healthy part of your business and the sector more broadly can thrive. That's the bottom line. So if I break it down to health numbers, 'cause I like those, when you look at the Australian population, 75% are considered inactive. If you look, and that's from the physical activity guidelines, right? So 75% of a country that prides itself on being sporty and healthy and the great weather, and we're down the beach and we're doing that, actually we're lying to ourselves for most of it. So actually, when you look at that and you go, right, our job is to get as many of those thinking, actually, I need to do something good about this. I need to take a positive step in that. Because we know 1 in 2 Australians who decide to get well-intentioned will join a gym. So we need to help convert those, and then every part of this sector can do what it does best, which is then get really competitive on who ends up with them as having a membership. But we want to push them into the market. So there's a number of things that you do to create a great ecosystem as part of that. One of them is our campaign Million Moves, because Million Moves is designed, it's set in September. What happens in September? Everyone starts to think about summer.
Yep.
What happens when they start to think about summer? They go, ooh, don't really like that. And so they start thinking, I know what you're talking about. And so we're all wearing very dark clothing here today. I mean, we know the tricks of the trade, but people start getting well-intentioned, right? So the idea is that, let's start pushing them in there. So Million Moves is a way of actually getting them moving, getting them thinking, actually, I can do something here, because the first piece of lethargy really is actually, it's easier not to do anything. I'll just wear some baggier clothing, or I'll just stay inside as much, or maybe I'll swim in muddy rivers, not clear waters in the beach, or something like that. Everyone's thinking about what can I do within my level of comfort. A Million Moves is set up to actually just go, hey, just move. It doesn't matter what it is. Choose your movement. You don't have to run. You don't have to do push-ups or sit-ups if you've got lower back pain. Actually choose what gets you moving, because what we want to do is give them this really good feeling that just it feels good to move. And then after that, actually, we want them to start thinking about, okay, what do you do next? Because that's a month. We've got enough time to change a habit. We've got great, and I mean, absolutely, brings tears to your eyes. We had verbatim feedback on this year's Million Moves. I've just seen the report, and there's actually a woman who's got a disability. So literally she needs a carer to get her out of bed every day. And she wrote to us. She said, I actually got out every day. I was looking forward to doing my moves. I feel really good. I still need a carer to get out of bed, but I've actually just learned I can get out of bed and I can look forward to the day, and I feel better in my top half. So she's paraplegic, so waist down. And she loves how she feels now. She's just joined a local gym over in WA. Credit that a lot of people in the public wouldn't think that our gyms can take people with disabilities, and we can, right? This person's just found a safe space because of Million Moves. We've got other people who are saying, hey, my mum and my dad are in a care home because they're older, and I decided, well, look, I'm sandwich generation, I'm taking care of them, but I haven't been looking after my own health, so I just thought, well, guess what, they're walking with me. Actually got them walking. They're feeling better for it, and they actually have built that into their routine. This is the kind of thing that we're talking about, where actually it's getting people moving so they can start thinking about what they can do for their health. So part of creating that environment in which our sector can thrive is actually taking that good intention, which we know everyone's had. Everyone's had New Year's resolutions and everyone's broken them, right? So this is actually converting those good intentions. A national campaign to do that. Now broadly, because it's only been running for a couple of years, so it's been growing a bit bigger each year. we actually want to link that closer to the gym. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're going, hey, I like the sound, but is it really going to convert? Well, guess what? You can call our offices anytime and we will link you in with this campaign. So you can think of that 30 days of Million Moves as 30 open days where we will drive people who are in your area into your gym if you want to get involved, because this is how we actually give them a really good experience. One of the things that we want to, and Emmett touched on it before, is that idea of a national campaign. Now, ideally, we'd have a national campaign that's kicking in around those times where people are not just thinking about being well-intentioned, but the weather's supporting them as well. We'd have it all year round if we could get that. But you think about that idea of, hey, I've just had Christmas lunch, I'm feeling a bit full, but I'm sitting there going, hey, actually, I should do something about this as well. Weather's pretty nice outside. Actually having something that helps them convert that knowledge that they should be moving more over the better weather months and actually getting them moving, actually having a national campaign that will help us with that, and then ultimately goes all year round. That's another thing that will really help. Some of the other things that we've been trialling as well, so we've currently got Queensland and Victoria. They've got vouchers. In Victoria, it's only for under 18-year-olds, but it's vouchers for $200 to actually go to any sports area, but also any gym. $200 a voucher that they can spend at any AusActive member gym. 196,000 vouchers have been redeemed through that scheme in the 5 years that it's been running. This is not a small amount of money, and the Victorian government's putting that up, right? So we want to actually get that kind of thing happening a bit more as well, because that's just a pilot program when it's only in one state. Queensland's got different criteria again, but this is how we want to work with governments to say, if you want to put your toe in the water to see just what our sector can bring to the game when we're getting people moving, actually work with us on this, because if our sector can be grabbing more of those, and a lot of these programs aren't capped. So actually it's on us, and if you want us to help you actually find ways to attract those $200 vouchers in, get the next generation, especially in places like Victoria with those under 18-year-olds, this is how we can really help you sort of really bring that in. So once again, creating another part of the environment, really nurturing that ability for us to thrive and actually have cash come through the door from someone who is just, we've just removed a barrier to them actually joining your gym. We've just removed a barrier to them getting fit, and we've actually just stopped someone from getting unhealthy through all the reasons we get unhealthy in this country.
And I think we know that if you do a workout that morning, you are far more likely to eat better. If you eat better, you are far more likely to get to bed on time. If you get to bed on time, you get a better sleep, and the virtuous cycle commences. And I really do think it begins with physical activity. What's interesting is that before COVID, the number one reason people joined a gym was to lose weight, and that had been the number one reason for decades and decades and decades. Now, the number one reason that people join the gym is mental health, right? And our friends over at the University of South Australia performed a meta-analysis 2 years ago now. It was released in January 2024, showing that physical activity is 1.5 times more effective than pharmaceuticals or talk therapy when it comes to depression or anxiety. So it really is the elixir of life, and we are the distributors of that elixir. And it really is about getting coordinated here, and as an industry, helping the nation and helping the individual.
Look, there was some really good sort of segues there, and really what I wanted to ask is a very general question that I quite often get by gym operators. And Emmett, this one's probably more directed at you, because obviously you're relatively new at it, but that's small operator that we were talking about before, and the small operator being, under 2 million in revenues.
Yep.
Why would they join AusActive? What is the benefit to them at a really basic level? What would be the sales pitch?
Yeah, so I always look at the three horizons, right? And the first horizon really is the here and the now. And that's where small business operators spend most of their time. And the here and the now is lead gen, lead conversion, keeping the gym clean, running some form of retention program through community, and focusing on the basics. Horizon 2 is 2 to 5 years out. And that's why they go to trade shows and conferences, right? That's looking at trends. So let's call it hot and cold therapy or Pilates or whatever it may be. What is it that I could do to add a product to my offering in order to grow my business? Horizon 3 thinking is really 5+ years out. And a great analogy is the automotive industry, whereby competitors come together, so call it Volkswagen and Ford, will come together and put $1 billion each in a pot, call that $2 billion, but they'll do R&D that gives them the value of $3 billion worth of research because they had the critical mass there. And they'll be friendly, right, at that point. Once they've established, let's call it the new battery for EV or the new drive chain or whatever it may be, then they'll pass it down to their own entities and they'll compete like hell at the retail level. That's what we're doing here, but we're not developing drive chains or EV batteries. What we're doing is we're trying to grow the industry through a form of R&D, but it's called advocacy. And that 27 million that I mentioned before, the population, of the 27 million, 22 million are above the age of 16, right? And about, depending who you listen to and which report you triangulate, there are about 4 to 5 million members in Australia. So let's just call it 5. Horizon 3 thinking is really 5+ years out. And a great analogy is the automotive industry, whereby competitors come together, so call it Volkswagen and Ford, will come together and put $1 billion each in a pot, call that $2 billion, but they'll do R&D that gives them the value of $3 billion worth of research because they had the critical mass there. And they'll be friendly, right, at that point. Once they've established, let's call it the new battery for EV or the new drive chain or whatever it may be, then they'll pass it down to their own entities and they'll compete like hell at the retail level. That's what we're doing here, but we're not developing drive chains or EV batteries. What we're doing is we're trying to grow the industry through a form of R&D, but it's called advocacy. And that 27 million that I mentioned before, the population, of the 27 million, 22 million are above the age of 16, right? And about, depending who you listen to and which report you triangulate, there are about 4 to 5 million members in Australia. So let's just call it 5. So of the 22 million over the age of 16, 5 million are currently members, meaning there are 17 million out there. Now, I'm not going to argue that all 17 million are thinking about going to the gym or even thinking about starting physical activity. It might be that 10 million of them don't think they've got a problem. They're not even intending on solving the problem. Go away, don't talk to me about it. But it may be that those other 7 million, right, they know it's a good idea. They've intended to get started before. Something just got in the way. That something might be price, it might be time, it might be convenience, it might be intimidation. Whatever it may be, it's stopping them move through the funnel. And so my argument to the small business operator is to join AusActive from an advocacy perspective so that we can, as one, work to grow the industry and to stimulate that funnel so that we can all benefit. Now, the strategic plan, without getting too detailed, really comes down to 3 pillars. We have advocacy, like we've been talking about. We have standards that give us credibility so that when we talk to government and when we talk to the medical community, they believe us and they trust us. And then the 3rd pillar, of course, is member benefits. There are a myriad of benefits, everything from insurances through to HR hotline support, legal support and whatnot. And I encourage those small businesses to click the link and check out what those benefits are, because they're real and they're tangible and they're material, and that would justify the cost of the membership. But to remember Horizon 3, that we've got to grow this industry together as a team, because guess what? Every other industry does, right? The good industries and the bad industries are out there lobbying government to grow their own industry and to defend their own industry. No one's doing it for us other than AusActive. We're the only ones.
Look, I was in a conference last week, and I actually liked the reference that, you know, there was a bunch of different operators in the room, and the pretext to it was, you know, they are not the competitors, they are the friends that should all be working together. Frenemies maybe, but the competitor to health and fitness was Netflix or you know, fast food or takeaway, and I really kind of like that analogy, because you do feel like, you know, when you gather at conferences, a lot of people think their competitor is the other brand, whether it's a purple brand or a red brand or a blue brand. I actually really like that, you know, analogy and that reference to, you know, our competitors are everything outside of health and fitness. So
yeah. So, and just on that, I mean, my background's marketing, right? So I follow the numbers. And why would you compete for a pool of 5 million when you got a pool of 17 million? Like, it's just sitting there staring us in the face. And the real issue, and I agree, you know, the competitor is is Netflix. It's sitting on the couch tonight.
That's right.
It's actually deciding to do nothing about it.
It's non-consumption.
Yeah, that's right. And so we need to remember that we need to compete for that larger market, because that just makes sense. And it's actually the person who walks past the front of your gym who doesn't think it's for them. That's the person that we need to compete for. And so that's where we, from an advocacy perspective, if we're reducing the barriers for that person to come in, whether it's cost or convenience or whatever else, anything that we can do in the policy space to actually reduce that barrier to that person coming in, that actually is us helping this sector compete for the 17 million who haven't made an active decision yet. And that's really the magic of this. And I've been involved with a lot of trade associations. I've worked with the pharmaceutical industry to get them billions, and I mean that's billions with a B, like worth of dollars on the PBS, which is where all the medicines are paid for in Australia. They get billions of dollars when they do this well. Mm-hmm. Actually, guess what? That's what I want to do for this sector as well.
Well, I think, if we can get doctors having prescription pads, and that's probably one of the things that at a broader context would be one of the aims of AusActive. I think, that would be a massive, massive step forward. So,
and you take, the wave of GLP-1s coming through, right? The opportunity is there. We know that when you have a drug like a GLP-1, up to 40% of the body weight that you lose will be muscle mass, and that creates sarcopenia, and the domino effect of that is just terrible, and we are the mitigation to that.
It wasn't even a word until 2017 was sarcopenia, and I can barely say the word, but the reality is our industry is changing at such a rapid rate, and the benefits that we all know as people from the industry are real. It's getting that education out there, and that link to the medical association, I think, is going to be
and look,
the big one.
I'm going to take a slight deviation here. But,
please.
I mean, AusActive ran this phenomenal event at Parliament House just before I joined. Had a great CEOs forum, and sort of actually probably the impetus for or the idea that Emmett's really talking about there. How do you get the leaders of the sector together? So that's AusActive really making sure that starts to happen. So there's this idea of planning for the future. But importantly, there was this great forum, over 150 people actually there listening to politicians talking to them. So kind of holding politicians to account and finding out what their view of the sector was. But there was the representative of a pretty large peak medical organisation there. And we actually presented the GLP-1 data and what it did around sort of, losing muscle mass. And one of the best things I've seen all year has been an AusActive member basically turning to that representative saying, so do you know about this? And essentially it was on the back foot. There's sort of, medical professionals need to know a lot, but they can't know everything. But that's the story they tell the government. We know everything, like we've got it sorted, right? And there was an AusActive member in this forum basically speaking truth to power, basically holding them to account, going, if you don't know about this, then you are prescribing the problem. This whole idea that they're helping people, actually, you'll see us talk more and more about this, and certainly over the summer months where a lot of people are thinking about what they're going to do around weight loss, and GLP-1s are going to be a big part of that, so all the weight loss medication, but you'll see us coming out quite strongly with if you're considering this, then you need to be on a first name basis with a personal trainer. Yep. You need to have that, because what was really shown in that room that day was that this doctor would have been sitting there with over 10 years training and then another 20 to 30 years experience in the profession. This guy, you want him as your GP if things go wrong. But what we saw that day was that there's less qualification to actually become an exercise professional. But what it showed him on that particular day was that we own our space. So, we've got a really defined scope of practice, and it's not as broad as a doctor. We're not health professionals. We're not trying to say that. But if it's in our space, we make it our business to know that, and you can trust us with anything that needs to happen in that space. Showed that really powerfully that day. And that's one of the things that we need to do to build that trust with, whether it's doctors or allied health professionals or nurses who could be referring to us if we get this right in a couple of years. But also for the government to actually go, we see we can actually send a big part of the Australian population who are fragile in their health, and you will return them much better. And it's that ownership of the space that I think this sector can be really proud of. I see that over my first 6 weeks. It's genuinely, it warms my heart. And you can see that it's their business.
one of the big reasons why we went from Fitness Australia to Oz Active is to start that, conversation. And, I was at that event and, it was right. There seemed to be that big blind spot in such a highly qualified medical person to not realise the benefits of what we can actually do. And I think that advocacy is such a big thing, and obviously, it's a big job ahead.
Yeah, and we're going to get bored of saying it, right? Because going back to what Emmett said earlier, the benefits of exercise compared to first-line therapy, so pharmaceuticals for anxiety and mild and moderate depression, actually same as or better than, and also no side effects, right? And that's factored into every cost economic argument. Type 2 diabetes, same thing, same as or equal to the benefit of pharmaceutical therapy. These are the things that people have forgotten because if you're dealing with something that's that significant to your health, our first stop is the health profession. And that's not wrong, it's just that we could have stopped it before that.
So the cynic in me says, we're fighting the pharma industry, we're fighting a prescription pad because from a doctor's perspective, they're not making money by prescribing exercise. What's your position on that one? Because I guess maybe
question.
Maybe you need to be a little more diplomatic in the response, but that's certainly where I sit.
This is a really big thing. So remember, but doctors don't make the money out of actually prescribing. And I'm not saying that we should actually stop people going to a doctor. I actually just want the doctor to think when they've got that patient in front of them. Bearing in mind that in Australia every year, 5.5 million care plans are written by doctors. 5.5 million. Like 3 million of those are for mental health issues. 2.5 million of them are for chronic disease. So when the doctor is sitting there going, right, I need to make a plan for this person sitting in front of me. I want them to think, right, okay, is this person suitable for exercise? Rather than, is this person suitable for that treatment? Because it doesn't have to be and or.
That's right.
It can be and as well as. So every time we say that exercise is, like, from the research, just as good as therapy, actually, guess what? It's got no contraindications. It's not like a medication that doesn't play nicely with another one. Put them together. Put them together, have an amazing impact if you want to. But maybe exercise will do it. And actually, guess what? There'll be no loss to actually trialling it because there won't be a side effect. What I can guarantee is that there's always a risk of a side effect with a medicine. If they go together, brilliant. Let's get that person a really big impact really quickly on something that's been making them feel ill.
And guess what? There's a study out of America that shows that the adherence to exercise is 14 times greater if you're a member of a gym versus not being a member of a gym.
That's right.
And so that's the value that we bring to that equation.
And so the idea would be, at its most, direct, if we got what we really wanted, I think the ideal system would you'd have any health professional, and not just GPs, because the reality is, why wouldn't a physio be able to refer someone for exercise? Why would a nurse, the most trusted profession in the country, be able to, for over 25 years, be able to refer into an exercise professional, right? Because there's nothing that can really go wrong there. Maybe they roll an ankle. I don't know. Maybe that. But in the scheme of things, it's going to be better than where depression could end up, right? So the idea of any health professional referring into an accredited exercise professional, and I say accredited because there needs to be a sense of trust. You need to remember that the world of health, they're patients. To us, they're clients or customers, and we're going to have to bridge that gap. But I think if we've got good accreditation, which we've already got, you'd have a referral to an accredited professional who runs a time-based program in a group setting. The idea of group, imagine the difference if you've got depression or like mild or moderate or anxiety and you're actually there with a group with a trainer who you can trust and you're doing something with them for maybe 2 or 3 times a week for 10 weeks. The government's paying for it, so you're not worried about that. You're in an area that's close to home. You're not being referred to a specialist who might be the other side of the city who you're going to have to wait 9 months to see. You come together with that group 2 or 3 times a week or whatever the evidence says for that particular type of program, because it'd be different for depression, anxiety versus type 2 diabetes versus overweight and obesity. You're there with a group who are all going through the same thing. They're all from your community. You've got your exercise professional who's like motivating you and trained to do that. And then importantly, we refer them back into the health system. because this is the other thing. If I use that idea of a program that's 10 weeks long, there's no medication someone can be put on that a doctor will really ever say, for a chronic disease anyway, go, oh, I can see what it's done after 10 weeks. All of it takes longer because, your cholesterol meds, it has to be a lot longer. They want to review it after 6 or 12 months. Exercise, the effect is kind of there from 2 weeks onwards, and we're talking about maybe 10 weeks of that. Brilliant, we can do some really good work there. And once again, in a group, a group that is going to feel better together, it's going to keep them accountable. I'd love to see them, one, using that gym in that space where no one else is using it at that time, so it's using that latent capacity in an existing site. But also, on top of that, these are people who, at the end of 10 weeks, hopefully going to look around and go, geez, I feel bloody good. But also, hey, we all feel bloody good. Like, why don't we keep staying here and feel bloody good together, right? This is the kind of thing that I'd really like to see happen, because it's that connection with a business that's of the community that they're in. Yeah. That's actually just given them a tangible benefit that is going to last for ages. And also, is going to be a connection to other people they might not have known or met before then.
Yeah. Well, to your point earlier, you talked about GLPs and exercise, being hand in hand. They're still giving a prescription, and the second prescription should be with exercise.
That's right.
The third thing I'd say is go to a facility that has like an in-body scanner that can do your measurements, that can do more than just BMI, which is such a terrible metric for measurement.
Yeah.
If people can see that there is a program in place with the right accredited fitness centre, and then, as you say, it goes full circle back for a medical review after that 10 weeks.
Yeah. There's upside and downside protection, right? So 2 + 2 = 5 in that scenario of the pharmaceutical with resistance exercise gives you the maximum upside, but it mitigates the downsides. Why wouldn't you do it? Well, the reason you wouldn't do it is because it takes effort, and that's where structured program comes into place, to Ken's point about having a social environment to be the incentive to keep on showing up. Now, as we talk about pharmaceuticals, I won't mention the university just yet. It'll probably be the first quarter of next year that we can mention it. But there's a university in Queensland doing a study on a pharmaceutical that has been in the marketplace for some time. It's a very strong pharmaceutical, very potent. Anyway, they found a side effect to it, and that side effect is a positive side effect, and that is that it can mitigate the risks of 3 of the 4 top killers. So I'm talking cancers, cardiovascular disease, and the like. They've turned around and invited us at AusActive to be on their advisory board if they get the funding to do a 5-year clinical trial on this particular drug, because of 2 things. 1, they know that physical activity will be the right additive, and 2, they know that they can trust AusActive. So if you want to talk about the long-term horizon 3, and if you want to talk about pharmaceuticals, this is the opportunity to have a seat at that table, not just government's table, not just medicine's table, but the pharmaceutical companies and the universities doing the research, and pushing the message that we are part of the solution, for sure.
It sounds like AusActive has a lot on its plate, and it's doing a lot of good advocacy, plus other work for the industry. Is there anything else we haven't talked about that you guys would love to wrap up on? Good question. Sales pitch time.
Well, while Emmett talks about that, why don't I give one? So 6 weeks in, still learning what the pitch could be, but obviously great member benefits, and it's been improving. And next week, this could be a bit of a scoop, professional indemnity insurance. We've actually just developed the best value policy, both in the benefits as well as the cost of it. That'll be launched next week. You definitely want to know about that if you're an exercise professional. Like, it's money in your pocket, but it's also better coverage than you've had before. So that's going to be coming your way very soon. The other thing is, look, we're restructuring a whole heap of things. There's been a number of changes in the way we do membership. So if you haven't looked at that for a while, have a look, because there's definitely www.ausactive.org.au. The key thing there is that really we know that there are people who have made this their career and they want to make sure that they know everything they need to know because they make it their business to own their space. And so there's a membership product similar to the one that we've had, but it's been tweaked a bit for those people. But we also know there's a lot of people in the sector who are really, they might do 1 or 2 shifts a week because they love the sector, that helps them feel great themselves and they like the work, but it's not their main game. So we've actually now got a new membership category which is really about meeting their needs because they know what they're doing. They might be sort of doing one Les Mills type course and they're sort of doing that. They don't need all the other things that are there. So if you haven't looked at the membership for a while, there's a whole heap of benefits there, but it's been structured to move with you as your career moves as well. So if you haven't looked at AusActive membership, have a look again. But what I would say is we need, as a sector, because it's a great, vibrant sector, but it's sitting in that blind spot. I know I've used that word a lot. You need a really strong representative body and peak body that's going to go toe-to-toe with policymakers in Australia. That's going to represent the industry fiercely and make sure that it's valued, visible and respected, as it always should be. But I reckon most people's experience doesn't always feel like that. So what I'll guarantee is that during my time here, we will make sure that we are loud and that we are delivering that respect, and that sense of value is always understood to everyone outside this sector, because we all know it, but once again we're sitting in that blind spot, and you need a strong industry body in order to do that. If you back in behind us, we can do so much. And we've got so many people who've done that for years. It's got a really proud history, and I'm just the latest custodian, standing on the shoulders of giants who've gone before me. But what I can guarantee is that if the sector backs in behind AusActive, we're going to achieve a lot of great things.
Yep. And a message to the business operators is to have the faith. Sometimes you've got to become a member before you can see the immediate ROI. And I mentioned before that Pillar 3 is full of member benefits, but if you're a business operator, it really is about investing into this industry to help us grow it for you.
Look, I'm obviously a proud person in the industry. I've been in the industry about 25 years now, and I just don't think there's been a time that's more exciting than now to be a part of this industry, but also to see, the next steps of what AusActive's going to achieve. And, I don't genuinely sit here and pump up things that I don't believe in. We're here for a reason, and I think AusActive is just doing a great job, and, big shoes to fill. But sounds like you've got pretty big feet though, so pretty impressed so far with what we've seen.
Absolutely.
And well, Emmett, you always impress me.
What do you want, Glenn?
Well, on that note, unless there's any final words.
Thank you for giving us your time, mate. Really appreciate the platform.
Time lucky, my friend.
Yes.
And that, as we say, is a wrap.